everybody, one and all. Welcome to yet another very exciting episode of the Friends Talking Fantasy podcast. My name is Charles, and with me today, as always, is my lifelong friend and co-host, Dylan.
I'm ready to talk some fantasy with my friend, Charles.
I'm ready to talk some fantasy with my friend as well, Dylan, and not just any fantasy. Today is a special day in which we go back to one of our early series in Friends Talking Fantasy history. Some would say the earliest.
Yeah, some would say that because it is. We're talking about Mistborn by Brandon Sanderson. This is going to be our Mistborn and the Art of the Magic System episode where we chat about what makes Mistborn pretty much the gold standard when it comes to hard magic systems in the fantasy genre. I think that's most people's go-to. If you ask them what's the best magic system in fantasy, you're going to get a lot of answers about Mistborn. So we're going to
That's
just take a look at why.
That's very true. And, it's just another opportunity for us to talk about a series that both of us really enjoy. And I think the magic system and the way that it's written and exposed to us throughout the narrative is a huge reason why we like this entire series. It's funny because that was the first series we ever read. And we read the last book and we were like, well, so long, Miss Bourne. It was awesome talking to you, but now it has to end. But now that we had our experienced podcast, was like, you know what? We could do more episodes about Miss Bourne. There's no reason why we had to stop. So we're very excited to bring it back into the fold for all the listeners.
As am I, Charles. There's no reason to let Mistborn go. So I think we ought to give a heads up that we're going to have spoilers through Mistborn Era 1. So that'll be the first 3 books, the original trilogy of Mistborn. So if you haven't read Mistborn yet, then first off, we highly recommend checking out Mistborn, a modern classic of the fantasy genre. And we also recommend that maybe you turn this down in your headphones right now because we will be spoiling Era 1 of Mistborn herein.
Yes. If you have not read the original Mistborn trilogy, definitely turn this down in your headphones. Well said. Ye be warned. And let's jump into it here, Dylan. So we've decided to structure the conversation. If you go to Brandon Sanderson's website, he has very extensive annotations on all of his books, but he also has like a blog in which he shares a lot of his philosophies on writing fantasy. And one of the most popular, I would say, on his blog and part of his teachings is his laws of magic.
Right, Charles. So we figured that this episode we could pretty much use Sanderson's own laws as a guide as we look at why Mistborn's magic system works so well. So I think a little knowledge you need heading in to understanding Sanderson's laws are the distinction between hard and soft magic systems, which is basically a spectrum. It's not a binary thing where you could just say this is either soft or hard, but typically at the soft end of the magic system spectrum, you have the magic that we don't really understand how it works. And the example typically given for a soft magic system would be Gandalf in The Lord of the Rings, right?
Yeah.
Though if you dive deep into some of this Legendarium stuff or Silmarillion, maybe you know a lot more than Charles and I do about what Gandalf can and can't do. But if you just take the main trilogy of The Lord of the Rings, it's like, what can Gandalf actually do? We know he can do magic, but we're not sure. There aren't clear rules. And that would be soft magic system. All the way on the other end of the spectrum, we have hard magic system, and Mistborn would fall into this category, pretty much a quintessential hard magic system. And in this, we have clear rules that the reader understands about how the magic system works. So it's delineated somewhere in the book itself, and then magic becomes something of a tool in the character's toolkit. So we as readers know, let's say, when you burn a particular metal, what kind of power that is going to elicit for our characters.
Right, exactly. Soft magic, very much like Gandalf. This very much like there's no like cause and effect. It's just like, oh, I'm the wizard, and in this moment, I called down this power and did these things. A lot of older school high fantasy employs this kind of magic, like a lot of old school wizards, kind of, and then there's this hard magic system that's very, cause and effect. It, you can kind of there's a science to it almost, and that's what I think is Sanderson's like crowning achievement with Mistborn is these like this cause and effect scientific approach to his magic system, but also in like how he how he teaches it, and I think that kind of goes into the first law here. If you want to bring us in.
Sure thing. So, Sanderson's first law is your ability to solve problems in a satisfying way is directly proportional to how well the reader understands said magic. So, he'll also say this is really just about proper foreshadowing. So, it's the same idea that you would want to have the pieces together, or at least somewhere in the text for a reader to be able to theoretically solve a problem that a character is trying to work out. So, in a hard magic system, which is you have a very strong understanding as a reader of said magic, then that gives you a lot more room to allow your characters to solve problems in a satisfying way.
Mm-hmm.
But you'll see not a lot of the big problems in something like, well, we won't spoil Lord of the Rings, but come on. Right. So it is difficult to, in a soft magic system, solve problems using the magic, because we as readers will be like, oh, I guess magic can do that. That came out of nowhere.
Yeah, right, exactly. Like using magic as a way to inexplicably solve a problem, which can be common in a lot of like not so great fantasy. It's like, and then the wizard showed up and did some magic, and everything's cool now. It's like, but how did he do that? Like, why can he do that? It doesn't feel earned for us. And how Sanderson is it that his first law is talking about making sure the reader understands things? That to me is very like quintessential Brandon Sanderson. He's always thinking about the reader experience. And the Mistborn magic system is not necessarily an easy thing to like if you were sitting in a classroom. It's like, here's how metallurgy works and how like being a Mistborn works. There's way too much going on, but it's the way in which he teaches it, and then the way he sets up these conflicts and the solution to the conflicts are all very clever. And we have some notes here of a couple different examples of the story in which Vin uses her understanding of allomancy to solve problems, and it's always in these like creative ingenious ways, and it's ways that we understand as the reader, like, oh yeah, like that's actually kind of clever. Like there's so many like moments where she's like, oh wow, well now none of these people are wearing metal, so I can't like push off of them, so I'll have to like go around them or like propel myself off of things. She's doing all these really interesting things, and that all comes down to this ability to explain it to the reader and for us to understand that it's working and that it actually is what it works within the rules of the magic system. It's not out of nowhere problem solving like maybe a softer magic system would do.
For sure, Charles. And also worth mentioning while we're on this rule that Sanderson's not claiming that there's anything wrong with soft magic systems, he's
Yeah.
just saying don't try to solve problems using your soft magic system out of
Yeah, that's
nowhere.
well said. That's a very important distinction. Like we all love Gandalf, you know. It's not like he like breaks the tension of a conflict, you know. He sometimes does, but he always like does it in an epic way. It's not just like we're relying on magic to get us through this moment that we don't understand what's going on. It's just like, oh, and then they're saved because magic. It's like, what? Not as satisfying to a reader when it's just like, well, because magic, and not, well, because Vin understood that they were low on their metals, and she was able to kind of outrun them and then destroy and then defeat them, you know. So it's like, oh, okay, interesting. Like I get that.
Right. So, I mean, this is as simple as when you see in Mistborn the characters are able to like essentially fly, quote unquote, to solve their problems
Right.
by using that coin pushing, right?
Yes.
Uh, well, we know that they can push against something that's metal. We know that it's kind of a weight comparison situation that
Yeah.
happens where if I weigh more than a coin, then yes, it goes down if I push it, but also then it hits the ground, and I definitely don't weigh more than the world.
Right.
So then, and Vin certainly doesn't,
Yeah.
and then pushing against the earth sends her flying up.
Right.
So
And if she's
from
fighting someone and she's pushing against someone that weighs more than her, which is most people because she's
yes,
very small, she can't, she doesn't really have that luxury because she'll just be the one that's flying backwards. And sometimes she can use that to her advantage. Other times it's a disadvantage. And it just depends on the circumstance of the fight. And that's what makes it exciting to witness, a battle between Allomancers.
yeah, and we also get some interesting stuff with obviously Vin's earring is a big thing, and we have all this time where Vin is using like seeker magic, which means that like she can detect that other people are burning metals.
Right.
So she's using that magic in a way that goes through copper clouds, which is supposed to shield that people are using magic. And that's another thing where we're kind of thinking, oh, why is that able to happen? Is there something special about Vin? But even that, Sanderson has laid out all of the ground rules for us, at least by the time the big twist with Vin's earring happens.
Right.
Where we know that about hemalurgy, which is something where you can basically put metal inside someone's body, and that gives them extra power. And we also know things like Vin has a sister that was killed by her mother, and all these kind of things that end up coming together for explaining why Vin is able to burst through copper clouds in a way that resonates with the pieces being there, even if we as the reader aren't always able to put
Yeah,
together
exactly. And that's what makes
beforehand.
that such a great reveal at the end of the book. Is like, this is something Sanderson set up in the beginning. Like, oh, Vin always had this earring. And then it's like, oh, this is how Furochemy works. And this is how hemalurgy works. And, you know, all these things that Vin always just was extra talented at that we kind of took for granted all click into place as part of the structure. It fits right in with all the laws that Sanderson has been presenting to us since the beginning, and that's what makes that a huge moment. Another one that I really like is kind of the mystery of the Lord Ruler, where it's like, how is this guy so
Mm-hmm.
much more powerful than everyone else? And you don't quite understand it until the end of the first book when you realize that he is both a Furochemist and an Allomancer. And it's
Right.
like, oh, so he's using the powers of one to feed into the powers of the other, and he just has like limitless power, and that's how he's making himself immortal. Like, from the outside, people not understanding the rules, he just seems all powerful. But then when you learn about the rules, you may even still not piece it together, and it's not until the reveal where you're like, that makes perfect sense within the laws Sanderson very explicitly set out for us already. And introducing this new twist, it all fits right into it. And that's what makes it such an interesting and exciting twist in the first book.
Well said, Charles. So we get all the pieces from obviously Vin and Kelsier, we know all about allomancy, but we
Right.
also get to meet Sazed and learn about feruchemy from him well before that twist is revealed. So
Right.
instead of just a thing at the end where it's like, oh, okay, I guess the Lord Ruler was just immortal because reasons, we get,
Yeah.
oh, he was manipulating both of these
Yes.
systems, which
Yeah.
we understood as readers very well. And if we had a long time to figure it out, or maybe
Yeah.
we were really clever and we figured it out, but I know I didn't the first time I was
No, I
reading it.
definitely did
Um,
not either.
but I knew when it was revealed, oh, Sanderson put all the pieces out there, and I just didn't make that connection.
Right. Very well said.
Cool. Well, are we feeling good on talking a bit about Sanderson's first law and ready to move on to the
Yeah, man.
second
The
law here,
second
Charles?
law. Let's do it.
So the second law is that limitations are more interesting than capabilities when it comes to a magic system, which is, I think, at first counterintuitive, right? We think we are interested in magic because of what it makes it possible for us to do that would not be possible otherwise.
Right.
However, when a lot of examples that people give are like, when we think of Superman, who's just amazing at everything, basically, he's oftentimes considered one of the more boring superheroes. And if you think about now, which superheroes are most popular and like the Marvel stuff that's picked up, it's not Superman, in part because he's just too good at stuff. And the people that we're interested in often are the ones that have more limit. So to bring that into Mistborn here, a big thing that we learn as a limit of the power in Mistborn is for pushing and pulling metals, we can only go in vectors. And
Right.
that creates all sorts of interesting scenarios where the characters, they can't just fly wherever they want. And
Hmm.
they have to actually use the limits of their system to solve their problems, and it gives us a chance for characters to figure out new applications uh, their of their powers,
Sure.
and then actually like build character through how they can be clever and interesting about. And an
Sure.
example that came up for me was like Vin's horseshoe trick,
Yeah.
uh, where she basically figures out how to use horseshoes to fly really long distances by pushing and then pulling and kind of rotating which horseshoes she's using. So that was a fun moment in Mistborn.
Absolutely. And this idea of understanding the limitations and exploiting them is what Vin is particularly good at as an Allomancer and as a Mistborn. Maybe not so much her just pure raw power, but her ingenuity and the way she uses the power. And I think this is Sanderson understanding his second law. It's like by having limitations, you create a tension and a suspense that we can actually buy into. And for me, like, yes, there's this idea of like there's a limitation to like pushing and pulling, and you can only go in vectors, but there's also like discovering limitations to something that's perceived as overpowered. And for me, that brings me to the Mistborn fight between Vin and Shan. Shan? Shan? How do we say that?
Shayan? Is
Shay?
it? There's an N at the end of that? I thought it was just Shay
Oh,
for
I'm
some
on the
reason.
Mistborn wiki, and there's an N at the
Okay, they're
end,
gonna
but
know more than me.
but it
But
yeah there's this great moment where there are two Mistborns and they're fighting, and then Vin realizes that she has her opponent is burning atium, and a lot of it, and atium allows you to see into the future. It's like, well, look, if someone else has atium and you don't, you're gonna lose because they can see the future and they know what you're going to do. And then Vin understands that, but then she's able to exploit that. Like she's able to burn atium and then like at a crucial moment stop burning atium, which confuses Shan and gives Vin the opportunity to kill her with an arrow. And that to me was like such a great fight because it was the limitations of something that was perceived as overpowered. It's like Vin figured out how to take advantage of someone who was confident in the ability that you can see the future. It's like, well, how can I um, trick her into thinking she's seeing a certain future and then use that to defeat her. And that's exactly what happened in that fight. And that's a great example of the limitations creating these earned beautiful moments. And that Sanderson just mastered it there.
For sure, Charles. Another thing that comes up is just the sheer fact that they depend on having access to these metals in order to be able to use their powers, right?
Yes,
The
yes.
Mistborn is a way less interesting story if being a Mistborn just means you always have the powers that ATM provides.
Right.
So I think that you have these interesting plot points that can develop because ATM is not always available, and sometimes Vin doesn't have access to it when some of these wealthier folks or more, for whatever reason, other people will have access to ATM when she doesn't, and she has to figure out, hey, how am I going to solve these problems, these conflicts, if I don't have access to some of the tools that other people have at their disposal? And it makes it more exciting and awesome when you get these moments like when they find the ATM stash at the end of the whole the whole series, the whole era one, shall I say?
Right.
And then Ellen is marching out there with all these other folks, and they're all just chock full of ATM to the point that their stomach hurts. It's like this is so epic because we have it like it's actually relative to the fact that you don't always have access to this power. And
Very
that's
well
why I
said.
think like the limitations are so important.
Exactly. And it's because ATM is so valued that it even is kind of woven into the world building aspects. Like the Lord Ruler was controlling the ATM supply and he was using that to gain control over the nobility. So at every level, both from like the power structure to like the world building, like how the economics of Mistborn work, they're all connected, and it's this limitations aspect of it that's almost as interesting as how powerful it is. It's like, hey, I can restrict access to this and control people through this. And then it's like now we need to find it. And it's like now we have it, but there's we have to fight other people that have it. So it's always interesting, and there's always conflict that feels like earned and that we understand it, and we're still like surprised by it when Vin has these breakthroughs.
Great points you're making there, Charles. And I think they lead well into the third law, which is expand on what you have already before you add something new. So what you're
Yeah.
talking about with ATM is rather than Sanderson thinking, oh, I need to go off and do all this other different stuff, he stops and thinks, how can I flesh out the ways that my magic system impacts the world? And one of the ways is that ATM is by nature of being this powerful and burning away like all the other metals do when used
Right.
by alamancers, becomes this interesting like supply and demand situation where it's extremely highly sought after and plays that huge role in the economy and consequently the plot of the book. So a big thing is considering how the magic impacts the world around you is one of the aspects of really exploring the depth of any given system before expanding outward and trying to just add all this other stuff without explaining why it is the way it is.
Yeah, that's very true. This goes back to Sanderson like understanding the reader experience. Like when we meet Vin, we just know that she has this like people like her around, and she can like is almost like this good luck charm. And then you learn, oh, it's because she's burning a particular metal. Then you learn about Mistborns. Then you learn about fear alchemy. And then you only hear about hemalurgy like towards like the end of the second book. You don't even really know what it is, and it's not until the third book where they might even actually say hemalurgy for the first time. So like weaving in these ideas and having them build on top of each other, and then in cases like ATM, like having it be part of the greater world building aspect of it is what makes this world like truly lived in. It's not just like being a Mistborn is a soul exists solely on its own. It's like, no, it's in this world, and if a Mistborn truly existed in this world and all these metals are required, there's going to be a huge demand. And so it's very clever of Sanderson to be like, well, what if the Lord Ruler just mined all the ATM and hoarded it and dished it out in little pieces? Like that would be the source of his wealth. So Yeah, super great.
Exactly. Yeah, and as you mentioned, there are three magic systems that we learn across Mistborn, but it still feels like Sanderson is emphasizing depth over breadth with these systems, in part because they're interrelated by the fact that metal plays a clear role in all of them. So that interweaves all the systems. He also gives us three separate books, each of which we get kind of more of a deep dive
Sure.
into a particular magic system. So another thing he does to expand on the system is again, we get some new magic powers that emerge even within something like allomancy from book one to book two, and so on. But rather than just making this new magic system that allows him to do that, he has us get to discover new metals. Like we learn about duralumin in
Mm-hmm.
book two, I believe, which basically allows you to just quickly burn all of another metal to make your power even stronger. So now we're having some fun with, oh, we knew what pewter did, let's say, but what if I burn duralumin at the same pewter enhances your strength if it's been a little while since strength, endurance, speed, those kind of things is physical enhancement. And then duralumin allows you to release all of that in one huge burst. What kind of things can we accomplish with this pre-established metal of pewter if we add in this extra metal of
Exactly.
duralumin?
And then going back to the second law about limitations being greater than powers, there's limitations to duralumin because when you use it, you're like it's incredible power, but then you are completely depleted of metal. So of that whatever type you burned. So if you did a duralumin push of pewter, then you have no pewter left. And if you're in a
Yes.
fight, you would get over, and if someone else is burning pewter, they're going to be stronger than you and you're going to lose. So there's always this cause and effect aspect of it. And everything is like a finite resource, and you can flare it, you can burn duralumin, but the more you flare it, the faster it burns, and the less amount of time that you'll have it. And in many cases, Vin is in constant need of preserving her metals because there's always that next enemy, So
Right.
that's just the nature of being a Mistborn is balancing your metal supply. And duralumin adds another layer to that where it's like, oh, now I could go all in and just like do a duralumin push and like fly. I do a steel push off of something and just blast into orbit, but it's like, but then I need to, hopefully I have another vial in hand to drink so that I can stop myself on the way down and I don't get myself killed. So, yeah,
Right.
very, very interesting.
And as you talk about that and its relevancy to the second law, it makes me think about the times where Vin is completely out of metals. And it's very interesting to see a character grapple with the fact that, like, yeah, if I have all my metals, I am a freaking like
Yeah.
killing machine is basically what Vin is if she wants to be when she has access to all of her metals. But then you take all that away and she's just was she's a teenager pretty much the whole series.
Yeah, she goes
right?
into her early
So
20s by
she's
the end of
okay.
the book. But for most
So
of it, she's in her teen years, yeah.
sure. So she's a teenage girl or a young woman with no particular powers to work with at times, and it's interesting to watch a character just reconcile that with the fact that sometimes they are extremely powerful.
Right. And there's also metals that that immediately clear out your metal storage in your
Right.
body, right? And so there's ways in which, when she's getting interrogated, people can make sure she has no metal, so she's not that posing killing machine. They force her to swallow a metal that, burns out all her other metals instantly. And then this idea of there's some people that can only use one kind of metal and how they get grouped together. It's like, oh, he's a person that can just burn this metal and has this capability. And then like how they form armies to fight Mistborn out of people that can only burn one metal. It's very interesting, and it all builds on top of each other, and it all just continues to grow. And it's all part of that expansion on how we know the balance of metals works, the pairing of metals works, the cause and effect, the economy of it. It's all super interesting, and Sanderson has a masterful way of explaining it to us that it doesn't feel like we have to feel like in a classroom learning about this. It's all told through the narrative. Like the very first like one of the opening things in this book is Kelsier just destroying people, and it's cool and it's fun. He's sneaking into House Venture, I think, and he's stealing atium, and you just see him fighting all these people, and all of a sudden there's people that come out with wooden shields because they know that a Mistborn can just deflect armor, and you're just learning all this through the narrative, and it never feels like you're being lectured to, and then it just kind of piles on a little bit at a time throughout the reading experience, and it always feels paid off and fun and exciting, very movie-esque, as we always said in our buddy reads. It's like, man, this reads like a movie. This would be a great movie, a great video game, because there are these elements of it that are so exciting and so action-oriented that naturally just progress the story, as well as being kind of intricate and complicated. And it's that fine balance that I think makes a lot of people be like, Mistborn, best magic system, very simply that.
Right. And I think, Charles, you're leading us toward Sanderson's zeroth law here,
Yes.
which is err on the side of awesome. And all of those things that you're talking about there, Charles, how cinematic those fight scenes end up being, how many cool things that we get to see Vin, Kelsier, and others do using this magic system. It is all indeed awesome.
100% could not agree more. All the Mistborn fights, right out of the bat, this is a series that is entertaining, action-packed, picturesque. There's all these different set pieces, fighting moments, different action styles, fun twists, fun reveals, and it's all embedded in the root of the story, which is the magic system.
Well said, Charles. Well, are you feeling like we said our piece over here on this magic system?
I feel like we said it all. It's fun to be back here talking about Mistborn. I missed it. It's a great series, and one I would easily recommend to anybody. And check out Sanderson's website. Read more. He's an open book, pun intended, when it comes to his writing style and his philosophies in writing. The guy's recorded lectures for free on YouTube that you can watch. He's really just an amazing wealth of knowledge, and it was very helpful in preparing for this episode to just read his annotations and his own writings, and it's so clearly exemplified in Mistborn. I think Mistborn is a masterwork of a magic system.
There's a reason that it's our go-to gateway fantasy recommendation here at the FTF podcast.
That's right. Well, with all that being said, let's get this outro music going. Thank you, everybody, for tuning in to yet another very exciting episode of the Friends Talking Fantasy Podcast. This has been your co-hosts, Dylan and Charles. Thank you so much for listening. If you liked what you heard today, let us know. Reach out to us on Twitter at the FTF Podcast with a number 1 at the end. You can also reach out to us on Facebook and Instagram at the FTF Podcast. If you're the kind of person that likes to email your podcast hosts, go ahead and do that. We'd love to read. Yeah, we'd love to read some emails from you guys, and that's the FTF Podcast at gmail.com. Now, Dylan, if they like what they heard, they want to show their love, and they just happen to be listening on Apple Podcasts, what kind of options are available to them?
They can toss 5 stars to our podcast. Just click that 5-star rating, and that's pretty easy to do, and we would really, really appreciate that. But you could also write a review, and that would be even better. But we'll just take the 5 stars if you only have time for that. We know you're busy.
Yeah, it's hard enough to go into Apple Podcasts, search for the podcast, click the log into your Apple ID, click the thing. It's work. But if it's within the realm of possibility, and it's free, and we love you for it. So thank you for considering that. Thank you so much for listening. And as always, go forth and conquer, friends.